Alright, good evening everyone. My name is David Rectoris and I'm the President of the Business and Investment Club. It is my great pleasure to see all of you here tonight. So many people made their time in the busy, almost pre-exam time. It's coming pretty soon. And I'm so glad that so many of you actually made it tonight to a very special guest and a very special event here tonight. Just before we start, all of you know that there are elections for the Student Association coming up, so now I would like to give very short time to one of the candidates to address you and share his vision for the Student Association. I've met this person, it's not me, I've met this person quite recently, but I've been impressed by his passion and by his vision for the Student Association for next year, so that's why I'm giving him the opportunity to talk. Don't worry, it won't be long, so please help me welcome Thomas Maharaj.
Hi guys, my name is Thomas Maharaj and I'm running for President of Victoria University Students Association. I want to tell you guys one story that comes to mind. While deciding to run for this election, a student came to me who had gone to our counselling services. This person wanted to commit suicide and could not get an appointment for 3 weeks. This startled me and it made me think, where does our student service levy money go? I want to make sure, first of all, as President, that our student service levy money goes straight to servicing the needs of students. It's a priority. As President, I will advocate for cheaper transport and better dentistries for all students of Victoria. These things are deemed as necessities to all students. Certified accommodation. It's a concept I engineered myself and I've spoken to students all around Vic about. And it means that I believe Versa can be the middleman between the university tenant and the landlord. So that means when a student like you is going out looking for a beautiful flat to live in, he knows what he gets before he buys it. A little logo on Trade Me saying university certified can make the difference from a student living in a good home or living in a bad one. It's important that students know that they can have a lock on their door when going forward with the landlord. Making sure that students have warm, dry, and safe homes is pivotal to my campaign. Please go to my Facebook page and invite your friends, because with your help, we can make a difference for students' lives. Kia kaha, God bless and thank you.
Thank you, Tommy, and I'll get on with introduction of the Business and Investment Club. What do we actually do? We mostly run on each Monday night guest speaker events on various topics. We've already had in the past people such as Tim Bennett, who runs the local New Zealand Stock Exchange, Dave Moskowitz, who's a big name in the venture capitalist business, who runs startup small businesses, Scott Witters, who runs and started the Rhythm and Wines Festival in Gisborne, and Tony Falkenstein, who's got more than 40 years of business experience. These are the people who you can meet every Monday night in person, hear their experience and learn from them and network with them. Alongside of that, we run small business projects, so if you've got anything in the back of your mind that you would well like to do, we are the perfect place for that. We've already started small projects such as Investment Academy, we're planning Big Business Conference, and next year Campus Stock Exchange Challenge. So that is all coming up next year, and if you would like to be in the loop, know what's going on, what we've got planned, you can sign up for free newsletter that I'll send right now. If you're already receiving the newsletter, don't worry then. Also, I would like to thank our partners for that made today actually happen. It's definitely Andrew from ANZ. It is Jen from Career Hub, who helped tremendously with the promotion. I would like to thank Anne from Business School, who helped amazingly with the preparations and organising of this event. And of course, our biggest partner is the university. And we've got, again, another very special person here tonight to address the Victoria University's opinion and experience when it comes to financial leadership. So I would like to ask the Vice Chancellor, Pat Walsh, to come here and say a few words.
Well, thank you. Thank you, David. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to introduce the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, and of course at the moment Acting Prime Minister, the Honourable Bill English. First of all, let me say that I think the Business and Investment Club is doing a great job. I know it's only been recently established, but you can see from the number of people that are here this afternoon the amount of interest that there is in this afternoon's topic. And I'm sure in previous speakers, and we saw some of those listed on the slide just a few moments ago. In fact, I discovered just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was playing golf with someone, Chris Baker, who said that he had come and spoken to the Business Investment Club and had been really impressed with the quality of the discussion and the calibre of the questions that were asked. So it's clearly a club that is meeting a need and providing a great forum for students to have discussions and debate on issues around finance, entrepreneurship, investment and so forth. Well, our speaker this afternoon, the Honourable Bill English, needs no introduction. One thing you may not know about him is that he is a Victoria University graduate, although to be honest we share him with Otago. He did his undergraduate degree at Otago and his honours degree here at Victoria. But interestingly enough, his honours degree was in English literature, which shows you that a degree in arts can prepare you for a wide range of careers, including being Minister of Finance, managing a $250 billion portfolio, which is a pretty daunting task. I spent a lot of this morning wrestling with our $350 million, not billion, dollar portfolio. That was challenging enough, trying to write a budget for next year. Bill English has to deal with $250 billion, so it's a huge portfolio and a very challenging task. I know that Bill will welcome questions and welcome debate. One of the striking features of his time as Finance Minister has been his willingness to engage in debate and to engage in debate with academics around the country. I know he has a group of academics that he meets with on a regular basis, and he's someone who's open to being challenged. He's open to controversial and pointed questions, and I'm sure you will provide him with plenty of those this afternoon. So I'm very pleased to welcome Bill here this afternoon. Very pleased to see such a large and what I'm sure will be an engaged audience. And please join me in welcoming Bill English to speak to you this afternoon.
Can I thank the Vice-Chancellor for the opportunity to come along, and particularly the Business and Investment Club, and thank all of you for turning out. As Pat pointed out, I spent my year here across in the von Zedlitz building, being trained up in Marxist and feminist literary criticism, and learning all about people like Michael Foucault, Derrida, and the deconstruction of literature. A set of skills that I found very useful in deconstructing officials' advice, understanding just what influences of power and authority are being exercised in the political decision-making process. Alongside that, I have a good, straightforward accounting degree, which I did because I went off. I had been farming. I went to university to pursue my interest in English literature, and I thought, well, while I'm there, I should do something useful. And so I did, and I can still recall I had one regular spot where I used to go from stage 2 Latin, because it was one of my subjects, to management accounting. And it was something of a contrast, and I have to say there was no one else in both classes. But I have had the opportunity to apply the skills of a sound education and critical capacity in my role as Minister of Finance. You don't need to be qualified to get my job. In fact, I don't think there's been an economist who had the job of Minister of Finance. Dr. Cullen was a historic history lecturer with a sound knowledge of his PhD, I think, was in Victorian economy statistics. Bill Birch was a surveyor. Ruth Richardson was a lawyer. So what we have the opportunity to do is bring to the role largely the common sense of an average person, I suppose, without too much, but with great access to expertise. So just to give you a little bit of context about the balance sheet the balance sheet topic that I meant to speak about. We have a lot of concentration in the management of government finances on the deficit or surplus. And as you'll know, we have set a target of surplus to next year, and next year we'll be one of the few developed economies with a budget surplus. And that just gives us more choices than other people have. Better public services, reduced debt, more redistribution, and I'm sure next year and election year there'll be quite a bit of discussion about what should happen if we get to surpluses. The reason we've been able to get to surpluses is because we haven't set out to make savings. We've set out simply to provide better public services. It's become quite clear that what works for the community is what works for the government's books. So when we have higher quality, more focused tertiary education, actually focused more on people getting qualifications and getting through, then we save money. When we rehabilitate prisoners while they're in prison, then we save money because we don't end up locking them up again. 60% re-offend after 12 months, and it costs $90,000 a year to put them back in prison. When we protect a vulnerable child from violence, we save endless amounts of misery in the community, and we save some money. So we're getting to surplus by focusing on providing better public services, on getting results, and the results we're pursuing are on the Beehive website, 10 of them. You can monitor our progress every 6 months towards those results. Another driver, so that's really about getting at the underlying drivers of our costs. And the underlying drivers of our costs in government are often misery and failure. And if we can reduce misery and failure, we will reduce our costs. And if we get better results out of our investments, such as our investment in education, we also get better financial results. Another driver of our costs is the government balance sheet. Now, the public discussion about the government balance sheet is particularly partial and in my view, over-politicised. Because it's all seen through the lens of asset sales. So the government is currently in a process of floating 49% of 3 energy companies and a bit of an airline. The total value of that transaction, if we complete it, will be somewhere around $5 billion, probably. We have a total balance sheet of $250 billion. So the asset sales discussion is, understandably political, but it's not really about selling the family silver. It's about selling a teaspoon out of the silver set, to be honest. So the government balance sheet is, those sales comprise $5 billion and are large scale sales by any Australasian measure, and the total balance sheet is 50 times that, around $250 billion. And that balance sheet, those assets, I'll just focus on the asset side, those assets are forecast to grow from $250 billion to around $275 billion over the next 4 years. So the act of selling part of some of the assets is not even going to barely slow down the growth of taxpayers' assets. Now, I pay a lot of attention to this balance sheet for 2 reasons. One is the mistaken view that public capital drops out of the sky, that it's some kind of free stuff that appears because the community at large wants to have some things for the benefit of the community. Well, that's wrong. We only have a balance sheet of $250 billion because people who work on the average wage 40 to 50 hours a week always pay their PAYE. That's where we get it from. People handing over $200-300 a week to the government through the tax system. The other principal source of revenue for it has been people paying their power bills. In both cases, we're dealing with funders of our balance sheet who have often obvious and arguably better uses of that money. So when we invest in a public asset, we need to bear in mind where it's come from. And it's come from the pennies of a whole lot of people for whom it is a large sacrifice to pay their tax, pay their power bill, and pay their petrol tax when they go and fill up their car. There's not near enough respect for the source of funds. If we let them keep their $300 a week, there's all sorts of stuff they can do with it. But they give it to us and trust it to us to act on their behalf. That's not how the public sector has behaved. It's behaved as if this stuff drops out of the sky. The second reason we pay a lot of attention to it is because it creates a lot of cost. Like most things government does, there isn't that good a reason, other than good intentions, to manage well, to manage resources effectively. And it's no different with capital, that is the money invested in our schools, our hospitals, our roads, our state housing, our managed funds. There's no particular good reason why government would manage those well, because government is not subject to competition for the management of those assets. So often it does it very poorly. And when we waste capital, it's just as bad as wasting operational spending. And I'll give you a few examples of that as I go through. So when we manage badly, it's creating pressure to use taxpayers' money to fill the hole. So if we make bad decisions in investing in our buildings and they become obsolete quickly, then we have to go and find the money to reinvest to do it again, because we didn't do it right the first time. If we under-service our roads, if we run a very poor state housing stock, as we have done for 50 years, it costs you hundreds of millions of dollars each year. It's because all the risks end up on my desk. So what looks like the odd one-off problem, badly run state housing stock, coal company that got a bit carried away, nice little learning media business down in the middle of Wellington that never really adapted to having to be competitive. One way or another, all those things end up on my desk, and we end up having to pay for mistakes. So so that's been one of the drivers of what's got New Zealand governments in trouble in previous years. So we've set about trying to change this. A number of things governments have done in the past have proven to be very sensible in the management of your assets. The setting up of SOEs certainly helped. You own commercial assets of around 50 billion, actually 45, sorry, probably going down a bit at the moment. And because those have been set up as companies with their own boards of directors, they are among the better managed commercial assets by governments in the developed world. So that bit's not working too badly, except that where it's headed is that you are going to be stuck with all the difficult assets. Who would buy a post office these days? Probably nobody. it would be quite difficult to give away a post office. You own a rail company and probably the world's most difficult market for rail, New Zealand. But, you know, we want one. So we're going to have to try and do something with it, like we're spending 10 billion over the next 7 years to try and make that company viable. On the post office, there's recently been some changes to its service parameters, and I received dozens of protests, or a couple of dozen expressions of protest about that, all on email. So we're able to email them back and say, well, if you really want the post office to stay open, you need to use it. So post your letter in, please. You're most welcome. Well, prove the point nicely. So your commercial assets are actually in a reasonable framework. The fact that they're owned by the government, though, doesn't mean they're exempt from commercial pressures, as we found out with solid energy. Big drop in the coal price, too much overhead, and so it's got itself in a bit of difficulty. Learning media, which has struggled, like most media type companies have, to adapt to the digital world. There's a mistaken assumption that because these are government owned, somehow there's no commercial pressure on them. So that's a very brief picture of the commercial assets. Most of those assets are, a fair few of them are in small companies you've never heard of, that are kind of, for historical reasons, on the government balance sheet. The other big clump, which people are really quite unaware of, is that the government is by far the largest funds manager in the country. The funds under management of ACC, New Zealand Super Fund, the government GSF, the government Super Fund, NPF, the National Provident Fund, exceed the value of the New Zealand stock market. So New Zealand stock market capitalisation is around 60 billion, and our managed funds are 75. In fact, they've gone up a lot in the last 12 months because they've had a freak year with world equity markets. Those are pretty well set up. You can argue about whether government is the natural operator of the country's largest funds management businesses. That's a legitimate argument. As it happens, we are. ACC and the New Zealand Super Fund being the two biggest bits, both about 25 billion each. In fact, just those two are almost as big as the New Zealand stock market. But they are run on a very arm's length basis with, in fact, statutory protection from the politicians, run professionally by boards and fund managers, very transparent reporting, and they perform pretty well, actually, by any market standard. So that's about half the balance sheet. Your businesses that you run, and the funds management businesses. The commercial part of it is the biggest risk to the taxpayer because a number of these businesses are under real pressure. The other big part of the balance sheet is what we call the social assets. Now, some of those, you could argue, are, it's a bit of a stretch to imagine them as anything like a commercial asset. For instance, our roads. However, when we look around the world, we see the commercialisation of road networks or parts of them. So there is some usefulness in creating a valuation for that sort of asset so that you can manage it properly, so that you have an understanding of the extent to which it's depreciating, for instance, so that you can build up an understanding of where the most economic investment is. Because there is a major income stream associated with our roads, road user charges and petrol tax. We have a user pays roading system. You pay for it. Every time you're filling up at the gas tank, it's user pays related to distance. It happens to be just a very crude form of user pays. when these days there are much more sophisticated mechanisms of charging. Time of day, weight of vehicle, route that you take. All just different versions of pricing. The use of an asset, we happen to choose a suboptimal pricing mechanism, which probably means we overinvest in some places and underinvest in others. So that's the roads. We have a pretty well developed framework for managing that asset, but it would certainly be refined and improved over the next 4 to 5 years. Probably the area where we stand to make the most improvement is education, health and housing. And I want to use the housing example because I think it highlights a number of the weaknesses in the way governments run assets, but also the opportunities to do a better job. People really often don't understand the size of the state housing stock. Its current value is around 16 billion. So the State Housing Corp New Zealand, or Housing New Zealand Corporation, is bigger than all the SOEs put together. It's almost 3 times the size of Meridian Energy, which will be the 2nd or 3rd largest company on our stock exchange when it's floated in about 6 weeks' time. So you have 15 or 16 billion invested in state houses. And the purpose of that is to meet the needs of those people with significant housing needs, of whom there are quite a lot in our community. But it is being the worst run asset, probably of any, that the Crown owns. Even by their own admission, about 1/3 of those houses are the wrong size, in the poor condition, in the wrong place, and therefore unsuitable for meeting the current demand for social housing. Now, up until pretty recently, a bit like asset sales, state housing has been regarded as a politically poisonous area to go into. And I'm not quite sure why. The political, again, it's a great example of how political rhetoric can prevent sensible thinking. So the political rhetoric around state housing has been, A, it's untouchable. B, what matters to prove that we care is the number of state houses that the government owns. So we don't talk about the people who might need them. We don't talk about what their needs are. We just say, you know, we care because we've built a lot of state houses. Fortunately, in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been quite a shift in that consensus, and now those groups who operate in the housing area are working pretty closely with the government to make the biggest changes in state housing that we've seen since it's been in 70 years. And what we want to do there is to focus on the needs of the people, not the name of the landlord. We need, because we believe that with $15 billion, either we help a lot more people, or we don't need to own a whole 15 billion worth of houses to help the people who've got obvious needs. In fact, you could argue we don't need to own any houses. Government owning houses doesn't work. In fact, it's quite a striking feature of housing markets how little corporate ownership there is. Individual ownership, family ownership has proven to be a remarkably resilient, economically effective model of owning houses. Government monopolies have turned out to be the worst, and we are probably the only country left on earth that has run it as a state monopoly. Almost everywhere else, certainly in the developed world, those models changed 20 years ago. Why do we worry about it? Well, just wearing a purely financial hat, It's the biggest single asset we own outside of the funds management of ACC and the super fund. It's the single worst run asset on our balance sheet. And if we can execute significant change over the next 4 or 5 years, then we'll be able to help a significantly greater number of the most vulnerable people in our society. It's a good example of why you should be careful about the way politicians talk about these things. Because the rhetoric on state housing has guaranteed that the most vulnerable people in New Zealand, too many of them live in poor conditions, in a deep welfare, deep poverty trap, with very little hope of changing their situation. And that is something that we must change. But the catalyst for change is to change the management of the asset, to pursue pretty basic accounting and management disciplines about how to effectively manage that very big piece of real estate owned by taxpayers, and certainly to break up the monopoly. Because if there's anything slower moving and dumber, I've never found one yet, than a government monopoly that is supported by overweening rhetoric about how much we care. So that's a bit of a picture of what we're up to across the balance sheet. One of the reasons it's worth coming along and talking to a group like you about this is because in the public sector, the kind of skills that enable us to help more people more efficiently are a bit scarce. You'd be quite surprised to find, well, maybe you wouldn't, I was, to find that we have sometimes 1 or 2 people responsible for billion-dollar assets. In fact, some assets we have no one responsible for them. One of the other large assets on our balance sheet is student loans. An investment club will understand why a loan is an asset. No one was in charge of student loans. Book value of, or face value of 10 billion, book value of 7 billion. No one. No one was in charge of the value of ACC, which is, as I pointed out, got a $20 billion funds management part, but also has a very large other part of it. So it was losing billions of dollars 5 years ago. No one was in charge of it, like no individual. So some of the management techniques we've brought to this has been pretty simple. Who's in charge? And when the answer is nobody, then it's unlikely the thing's being that well managed. When you find out it is that person there, and you find out they've got don't have the skills or don't have the analytical backup, then it's likely things aren't being run pretty well. So the public sector has been negligent in its stewardship role of assets that are funded by the hard-earned wages of New Zealanders. We need a lot more people in the public sector who understand basic accounting concepts and how you can apply those to the management of assets. One of the measures we've taken to upgrade those skills are public-private partnerships, PPPs. There's nothing magic about having the private sector manage an asset. What is magic, though, is having them talk with the public sector about the operational and financial risks associated with it. The difference is not that the private sector is private, it's just that the private sector understands constrained capital. They have to raise it off banks. They have to pay a cost of capital. They have to get returns for a shareholder. Therefore, they think a bit harder about how to use it. And we do PPPs not because every government asset's suitable for it, It's certainly not. They'll only ever be a small slice of our balance sheet. We do them so that we can learn the techniques of operational and financial management from the private sector and transfer those across all our assets by incorporating them into the core capacity of our public service. So we have one prison and a PPP, but we've got a contract that ratchets their performance against every other prison the government owns, and the corrections department is now copying shamelessly, and they're enjoying it shamelessly, the techniques that the private operator and the private contractor are going to apply. I would hope that as the public sector takes on a greater sense of stewardship, and it is, around assets, then they're going to be looking for the kind of skills that you have in the core public sector, but also people who are willing to take part in what is a growing sector of market activity around government assets. People who can write contracts, people who can take part in contestable processes. In fact, there's a small industry of it in Wellington now, and it's likely to grow. So I think I'll finish off there just simply to re-emphasise one point. The reason we bother with it, with things like asset sales, PPPs, is not because we believe that government should be run like a company. It can't be. It's because bad management wastes resource that vulnerable people need. And it can waste it on a large scale. And support programs we could provide for the most vulnerable with a few $1,000s could make a big difference, while we're wasting hundreds, billions sometimes on the poor management of public assets. It's changing, and I hope that as you enter the workforce and become fully fledged taxpayers, because it will happen, and that when you're paying that tax, you'll ask the question, are the people I'm giving this to really taking it seriously? And have I got skills that I can help apply to doing a better job on behalf of the common good? Thank you.
That was the time for questions, so definitely go for them. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes, possibly.
Okay, right down the back.
I have a question about employment opportunity. In your talk, you mentioned about PAYE is tax pay, and the government redistribute the revenue to different services like housing, like health and like education. If the government is able to create more jobs, so the less people on benefits and more people paying tax, would this increase the state asset?
Look, if we, the question was, if the government created more jobs and less people on welfare, would this increase state assets? Well, it certainly improve our operating balance. Okay, every new job we get tax in, and then we don't have to pay someone who's on welfare. And I think everyone understands that. The question is, how do you bring that about? And there's really, I would say, there's two factors that we push to bring that about. One is doing as much as we can to create an environment where it's easy for a business to decide to hire another person. So we're not creating jobs, actually the government's shrinking a little bit. But we can make it easier for businesses, give them the confidence to hire another person. That's the demand side. And then we are going through some pretty big changes in how our welfare system works, because we believe that when you've got 1 in 12 working age New Zealanders on welfare, there are more things we can do with that population to support them into work. And there's quite a lot of people on welfare who, through no fault of their own, are in a situation where it's very difficult for them to get out of it. So I'll just give you an example. An example would be a 25-year-old with depression. If they go to the wrong doctor who doesn't diagnose it or doesn't know how to treat it, they can end up on the sickness benefit. If they stay on the sickness benefit long enough, they lose their mates, they lose their Sky TV subscription, are stuck in their depressing little flat by themselves. And they get worse, less able to get into work, not more able. And if they stay there a long time, they end up on the invalid's benefit, of which 80,000 New Zealanders are. And if you get on the invalid's benefit, the main reason you leave is you go on national super or you die. Okay, those are the two main exits from invalid's benefit. If we put in a bit of money straight up and made sure that all those people with depression on our welfare system are getting diagnosis and treatment, we could save them a lot of misery and save a lot of money on welfare and have them available for work. So that's what we're doing. And in the last couple of years, we've put $250 million into lifting our support for people to get off benefit and into welfare. And actually, I think it will have a significant impact on our balance sheet in the long run.
Hi, Bush. I work at the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment. Recently graduated college. So I'm working as part of the former Department of Building and Housing, and we deal with a lot of the weather type issues that homeowners deal with. So my key question to you is, Mr. Bush, how is the government taking key steps to mitigate the risks like weather type issues and construction issues through state housing? Because usually I deal with private homeowners, and they have a ton of issues. And there's a lot of inefficiencies in how we're dealing with these issues as well, in terms of like financial assistance and also legal costs. So like, how is the government trying to deal with the state?
Okay. Question was how are we dealing with issues like weather tightness issues in the state housing stock. Pretty poorly in the past and getting better.
Yep.
What we've tended to do is underappreciate the cost of maintaining social housing. And we've only got to look at the social housing to see the evidence of that. Right? Does it look flash? Does it look well looked after? No. You drive down the street in most of our suburbs and you can pick the difference between the government-run houses and the privately owned houses. And there's some pretty straightforward reasons for that. Generally, the government's trying to do it cheap, and it doesn't do a good job of realising the amenity value house by house, because it's different in every house. Government sort of runs industrial systems on a large scale because it owns 70,000 houses, so it just treats them all the same. So, and that's not a good way to get value out of real estate. So, what tends to happen is the government has these cycles of catch-up maintenance. So every 10 years or so, they spend 300 or 400 million trying to catch up the maintenance. Actually, what we should be doing is running proper asset management techniques that maintain the value of your asset year by year and don't let it fall into disrepair or become uninsulated, damp and dangerous for the people who live in it, which is what we've done for the last 70 years. So we're just trying to take the asset management techniques that work everywhere else and apply them now to state houses. In the long run, others will own some of those houses and we'll have to compete with them, and that will be good.
Yeah, I watched a debate a week or two ago on TV3, and Sam Lotuega and Peter Dunn expressed their opinion about the housing market. They were interested in perpetuating the bubble, it sounded like forever, to maintain equity for people that are already on the property ladder. It's a little bit worrying. I'm wondering if the government has a plan to tackle the affordability problem that doesn't involve burying the head in the sand.
Yes, in fact we think a whole lot of other people are burying their head in the sand. The key issue for the housing market at the moment is supply, right? Just by way of example, in Auckland, with the population pressures, they need 13,000 new houses per year. They're building 4, and that's not enough. And it's funny how the prices are going up. You don't have to be an economist to figure that out. I have to say 3 or 4 years ago that was regarded as a crazy right-wing idea, that supply had any impact. And planners in your city council still don't regard supply as relevant. Okay? We disagree. 2 weeks ago we passed legislation that does two things. It allows a fast track for what's called special housing areas, which are subdivisions, new subdivisions, and it gives the government a reserve power to issue consents if no one else will issue them. That is the opposite of what you're accusing those guys of. That will do more to slow down the increase in equity value for insiders than anything else you can do. So we will sign off between now and Christmas upwards of 10,000 new units of subdivision in Auckland, and they will be starting to build in the first quarter of next year. No one believes it's going to happen. The market has not taken it into account. They think it's just politicians yapping. But actually we've got an agreement between the government and the Auckland City Council because Mayor Liam Brown understands the key problem in Auckland. There's been no lower quartile housing built for 10 years. And that's why I don't believe anything the opposition says, because when they were the government, no low middle income housing was built in Auckland, zero. And we are going to make sure it's getting built by the thousands. That won't be so flash for values for everybody else, but it's fundamentally unfair that we allow a combination of NIMBYism and plannerism to lock middle income New Zealand out of the housing market. And we passed legislation that's going to allow us to do as much as we can to change it. Does that answer your question?
It does. Does that include infill housing and the medium and high density housing?
Yeah. In fact, there's a bit of an argument about this, infill versus greenfields. We're completely indifferent about whether it's infill or greenfields. Those are local decisions. As it happens in Auckland, they don't want infill housing. And they've been through their consultation process, and the communities there have tried to stop densification. And I'll tell you another effect of that. The biggest supplier of densification to Auckland City, and it would be the same in Wellington, should be Housing Corp New Zealand, that is the government. So we can do up to 10 to 12,000 units where we can redevelop core breaker sections that currently have poor condition 3-bedroom houses on them and develop it in medium density housing. Auckland City's plans are going to stop our plans to do that. And in Wellington, we could do the same if it was possible. New Zealand's housing market is among the least affordable in the developed world, and as a generation, you should be kicking up more fuss about it than you do, because it's ridiculous that the median house price should be 7 times the median income on average across New Zealand. It used to be 3 when I was your age. And now it's 7 at its worst and floats down to 6. So if you want to deal with your student loan, your national debt and your home mortgage, you should be pushing pretty hard on politicians, including your local council politicians, to ensure an adequate supply of housing is coming to the market. We're not Singapore, we're not Hong Kong, we've got plenty of room. We really do. And you should be able to afford a house on a reasonable income.
This is probably a less serious question. What is your average day?
My average day. I don't have too many average days. It's one of the great things about my job. Let's just look, my job is just endlessly varied. I get to poke my nose into everything from how the police are run through to these housing issues, which I've spent months on, through the funding of arts and culture, it's the tourism, all the poverty stuff which I run the committee on. So I don't start too early because I've got kids. I'm a father of 6. Boys will leave home. And so I start about 8 o'clock in the morning and finish about 11 at night and I go home. But that's quite, and for politicians, have to go to work at night because Parliament sits about 7 to 10, and there's usually meetings till about 10 o'clock at night. But look, there's not too many politicians should complain about their workload because they all volunteer for it. In fact, they need you to vote them out to stop them killing themselves at work. But it is a fantastic opportunity. And I think I'd speak for all 120 members. Just, you know, they've got, the only qualifications are energy. You've got to have a lot of energy to just keep at it. And you do have to like interacting with a very wide range of people. If you don't like people much, you'll drive you crazy. Right, down here.
Hi there. Just talking about vulnerable persons. The earthquake, Christchurch earthquake 2010, the crisis. If that was to happen in Wellington, how you can provide for the vulnerable people in Wellington with the housing crisis and all? There'd be a lot of people out there that would be in need of immediate housing, to be a crisis. What have you set aside to surplus to handle a situation like that?
Okay, so this is a proposition about what we do if there's a major earthquake in Wellington.
Yeah.
About housing the most vulnerable. Look, you'd be best to talk. I can't answer the question about sort of disaster recovery plans. I can reflect, make some generalisations on the basis of the situation in Christchurch. What amazed us was how resilient those communities turned out to be. So despite the fact that they had thousands of houses damaged, some of them quite severely, they didn't get too many people who became completely destitute or found themselves in severe need. In fact, the bigger problem in Christchurch is just the ongoing psychological pressure of 3 years later still sitting in your busted house because your insurance companies can't agree on which of the 15 earthquakes caused the damage, because that's actually the problem they're trying to solve. 15 earthquakes that reached the insurance threshold, and you can understand families, individuals getting in a pretty bad way. So in terms of the emergency effect of a large earthquake here, you'd be surprised how people will sort a lot of that out for themselves. The other lesson from Christchurch is that there's some things government can do that make a big difference, like what we did down there was we paid everybody who worked in the central business district for about 3 weeks. Okay? They just turned up to social welfare and we paid them a wage, and it cost, I don't know, 40 or 50 million. But it kept the whole system moving for that brief period. In fact, I think it was the most effective thing we did.
Cheers, thanks.
So thank you very much for the questions. We'll move into the individual questions because I know a lot of you have your own questions and you would like to ask them in person. We've also got Peter in the back, so I would like to use this opportunity to thank Bell a lot for his time and for his wisdom that he's presented tonight, and give him a little gift for appreciation for coming. Please hang around, come back, grab us some pizza and ask some questions.